In the highlands of modern-day Ethiopia, stone giants scrape the sky. They are monolithic, carved from a single piece of granite, engineering marvels of an ancient age. These are the silent tombstones of a forgotten superpower, the Kingdom of Axum. For centuries, this civilization was counted among the world's 4 greatest powers, and equal to Rome, Persia, and Han China. It minted its own gold currency, commanded vast trade routes across the Red Sea, and held dominion over a sprawling territory. How, then, could an empire of such immense wealth and influence recede so completely into the mists of history, leaving little more than these enigmatic monuments behind? The answer is not found in the usual tales of conquest or dynastic collapse. It is found in a single, precious material, a substance so desired it financed an empire, and so finite it brought that same empire to its knees. This is the story of the rise and fall of Axum, a kingdom built not on stone, but on the pursuit of white gold, African ivory. Long before the great powers of Europe looked to Africa with colonial ambition, Africa harbored empires of its own, vast, wealthy, and deeply connected to the economies of the ancient world. At the crossroads of Africa, Arabia, and the Mediterranean, on a high plateau overlooking the Red Sea, one such power emerged. This was the Kingdom of Axum. From the 1st century to the 7th, it was a pivotal player in global commerce, a cosmopolitan hub whose influence stretched from the Nile Valley deep into the Arabian Peninsula. Its great port city, Adulis, was a vibrant marketplace where Roman galleys docked alongside Indian dhows, all drawn by the promise of Africa's legendary resources. Yet, while Rome and Persia are household names, Axum remains a footnote in the grand narrative of history. This documentary seeks to correct that oversight. It will argue that for a crucial period, Axum was not merely a participant in the ancient economy, but a gatekeeper. It controlled the primary source of one of the Roman world's most coveted luxury goods. More valuable than many spices, more sought after than exotic woods, this single commodity became the engine of Axumite civilization. It was carved into the thrones of senators, the sacred statues of gods, the intricate inlays of aristocratic furniture, and the delicate jewelry of the elite. The Roman appetite for it was insatiable, and the masters of Axum were uniquely positioned to satisfy it. They built a sophisticated and ruthless logistical chain, reaching deep into the African interior to hunt the largest land animals on Earth, transporting their tusks hundreds of miles to the coast and selling them into a global network that carried them to every corner of the Roman Empire. The profits were staggering. Ivory wealth funded a powerful army and a sophisticated bureaucracy. It allowed Axumite kings to do something only the greatest empires could: mint their own currency in gold, silver, and bronze, stamping their authority on every transaction. It paid for the quarrying, carving, and erection of their colossal granite stele monuments of power and prestige that defied the engineering capabilities of their time. For a golden age, the ivory trade was the lifeblood of Axum. But what happens when an entire civilization anchors its destiny to a single, finite resource? This investigation will trace the flow of that white gold, from the savannah to the Roman Forum, revealing how this trade forged an empire. But we will also uncover the fatal flaw in Axum's design. We will explore how shifting global politics, the rise of new religions and rival empires, and the slow, inexorable depletion of the very resource that gave them their power, conspired to bring the kingdom to its ruin. This is the story of a spectacular rise and a cautionary fall, a testament to the fact that when the foundation of an empire rests on a single commodity, its collapse is not a matter of if, but when. Empires are not born in a vacuum. The story of Axum's economic might begin centuries before its first king minted a gold coin, in a land steeped in myth and trade, a place the ancient Egyptians knew only as the land of Punt. To the pharaohs, Punt was a semi-mythical paradise, a source of legendary wealth. Temple inscriptions from as early as 2500 BC describe grand expeditions sailing south to this fabled coast, returning with ships laden with frankincense, myrrh, exotic animals, and gold. The famous reliefs on Queen Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahri depict a vibrant, thriving society in Punt, a people well versed in the art of the deal. While the exact location of Punt remains a subject of academic debate, most evidence points to the coastal regions of the Horn of Africa, the very lands that would one day become the heartland of Axum. This Egyptian fascination reveals a crucial truth. Long before Axum, this region was already a vital node in the ancient world's network of luxury goods. Geography had endowed this land with a hand of rare and powerful cards. The Ethiopian highlands are a vast, elevated fortress, a temperate and fertile plateau rising dramatically from the surrounding deserts and hot, arid coastlines. This provided a secure and productive agricultural base, capable of supporting a growing population and a complex state. But its true genius lay in its position. The plateau stands sentinel over the Bab el-Mandeb, the narrow strait that serves as the southern gateway to the Red Sea. This is the choke point, the essential maritime corridor connecting the Mediterranean world of the Romans with the vast, rich markets of the Indian Ocean. To control these highlands was to control the nexus of two worlds. It was a place where Africa, Asia, and Europe could meet and trade. By the 8th century BC, this potential began to be realized in a new and sophisticated way. A powerful kingdom known as Dempti, with its capital at Yeha, emerged in the northern highlands. The ruins of Yeha today are dominated by a remarkable structure, a large, beautifully preserved temple, built with a precision and skill that speaks to a highly organized society. The temple's architectural style, along with early inscriptions found in the region, shows a strong influence from the Sabian kingdom of southern Arabia, the civilization of the legendary Queen of Sheba. For centuries, Sabaean merchants and colonists crossed the narrow Red Sea, bringing with them their gods, their architectural techniques, and, most importantly, their script and commercial acumen. But Diemt was no mere Sabaean colony, it was a fusion. Archaeological evidence reveals a complex interplay between these South Arabian newcomers and the indigenous Cushitic-speaking peoples of the highlands. Local pottery styles mingle with Arabian ones, Sabaean gods are worshipped alongside local deities. This was a process of cultural synthesis, creating a unique Ethio-Sabaean identity. The people of Demet were laying the political and cultural groundwork for Axum. They established control over the trade routes from the interior to the coast, likely trading in salt, obsidian, and incense. They built the first large-scale political state in the region, demonstrating that these highlands could support a centralized, hierarchical society. They were, in effect, the prototype. While the Kingdom of Demp eventually faded from the historical record around the 4th century BC, the commercial spirit it fostered did not. In the centuries that followed, a collection of smaller chiefdoms and city-states continued to vie for control of the lucrative trade routes. They continued to ship fragrant resins, tortoise shells, and hides across the Red Sea, feeding a growing demand in the Hellenistic and, later, Roman worlds. They were becoming expert merchants, brokers of Africa's exotic resources. They were owning the skills, building the networks, and solidifying the infrastructure necessary for the next great leap forward. The stage was set, the historical and geographical foundation was secure. All that was missing was a single, transformative commodity, a product so universally desired it could fuel the rise of a regional power into a global empire. They would soon find it, not in the sap of a tree or a vein of rock, but in the mouth of the African elephant. In the opulent markets of the Roman Empire, discerning buyers understood that not all luxuries were created equal. Silk from the Seers, spices from India, incense from Arabia, each had its own gradations of quality, and so it was with ivory. The workshops of the Mediterranean were familiar with the smaller, more brittle tusks of the Syrian elephant, hunted to extinction by the 1st century. They knew the ivory of the Indian elephant, suitable for small carvings and inlays, but limited in size and possessing a yellowish tint. But then there was the ivory that came from the south, through the great port of Adulis. This was something different entirely. It was larger, denser, and glowed with a creamy white luster that seemed to possess an inner light. This was Axumite ivory, the undisputed gold standard of the ancient world. The source of this superior product was Loxodonta africana, the African bush elephant. A creature of immense size and power, it was a living mountain of muscle and bone, far larger and more aggressive than its Asian cousins. Crucially, both males and females of the species grew enormous tusks in sizes that could reach lengths of over 6 feet and weigh more than 100 pounds each. These were not just teeth, they were natural repositories of the world's finest carving material. The sheer, unblemished size of these tusks allowed Roman artisans to dream on a scale previously impossible. They could carve entire statues, elaborate, single-piece chair legs, or wide, seamless panels for imperial litters. Its dense, cross-hatched grain structure made it exceptionally durable yet receptive to the finest, most detailed carving, capturing the subtle folds of a toga or the delicate features of a goddess with breathtaking clarity. This was the raw material that fueled Axum's rise. This was white gold, but acquiring it was a brutal, terrifying, and highly organized enterprise. This was no simple hunt, it was a form of warfare waged against the largest land animal on the planet. The Axumite state did not leave this critical task to chance or freelance hunters. The acquisition of ivory was a state-controlled industry, a vital component of the royal treasury. Elite hunting parties, likely comprised of soldiers and specialized trackers from subject tribes, were dispatched from the highlands south into the savannas of the African interior, the vast, elephant-rich lands of modern-day Sudan and Eritrea. These were long, arduous expeditions, pushing deep into dangerous and often hostile territory. The methods of the hunt were, by necessity, merciless. Accounts from later periods, likely reflecting ancient traditions, describe several techniques. One common method was the pitfall trap, a massive hole dug along a known elephant path, camouflaged with branches and leaves, its bottom lined with sharpened stakes. More active hunts involved surrounding a herd, using fire and noise to create panic and confusion, separating younger elephants or females from the group. The most dangerous method was a direct assault. Hunters would use their agility to dart in from behind, severing the powerful tendons of the elephant's rear legs with specialized axes, immobilizing the great beast before moving in to finish it with spears and arrows. The risk was astronomical. A moment of hesitation, a misplaced step, meant certain death. Once the animal was felled, the grim work of harvesting began. The two tusks had to be hacked from the massive skull, a gruesome and physically demanding task. But this was only the first step in a long and punishing logistical chain. The true challenge was transportation. The hunting grounds were often hundreds of miles from the Axumite heartland. There were no wheeled carts capable of traversing this rugged terrain. The only way to move the tusks was on the backs of men. Caravans of porters, each man burdened with a heavy tusk or provisions, would begin the slow march north. They moved through dense forests, across arid plains, and up into the dizzying altitudes of the Ethiopian plateau. This was not a simple, straight-line journey. It was a projection of imperial power. The routes had to be secured, either through military patrols or through a complex system of tribute and alliances with the various clans and chieftaincies whose lands the caravans crossed. Local leaders would be paid off, or forced, to provide safe passage and supplies, likely receiving a share of the profits or finished goods in return. This entire network, from the hunters in the south to the porters on the trail and the bureaucrats in the capital, was managed by the Axumite state. It was a river of ivory, flowing from the heart of Africa, managed and monetized at every step of its journey. The final destination for these raw, blood-stained tusks was the great port of Adulis, where they were cleaned, sorted, and graded, ready to be sold to the waiting merchants of the Roman world. The immense human cost, the danger of the hunt, and the Herculean effort of transportation were all invisible to the final buyer. All they saw was the perfect, polished product, the white gold that was the foundation of Axumite power and prosperity. Where the scorched plains of the Danakil Depression meet the turquoise waters of the Red Sea, it was more than just a city, it was the engine of Axum's prosperity, the crucible where the raw, primal wealth of Africa was transformed into the gold, finery, and political capital of a global power. To understand Axum, one must first walk the sweltering, crowded, and impossibly wealthy streets of its greatest marketplace. Our most vivid portrait of Adulis in its prime comes not from the Axumites themselves, but from an anonymous Roman-Egyptian merchant who, around the middle of the 1st century CE, authored a remarkable document, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. This was not a work of literature, but a practical sailor's handbook, a detailed guide to the ports, peoples, and commercial opportunities of the entire Indian Ocean basin. And in its pages, Adulis comes to life. The author describes it as an open roadstead, a bustling harbour lying 3 miles inland from a deep bay, connected to the sea by a canal. He notes that it was a journey of 8 days from the port up to the metropolis, the capital city of Axum itself, a clear indication of the kingdom's dual nature, a maritime commercial power governed from a secure highland fortress. To arrive in Adulis by ship was to enter a vibrant, chaotic, and profoundly international world. The harbour would have been a forest of masts. Roman vessels, with their distinctive single square sails, would be moored alongside the elegant stitched plank dhows of Arab and Indian traders. Merchants from Alexandria would haggle in Koine Greek, the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean, while Axumite officials, draped in fine cotton, would give orders in Ge'ez. Sailors from the Malabar coast would shout in ancient Tamil, and traders from Persia would negotiate in Pahlavi. This was a place of connection, a city whose very existence was predicated on its ability to bring disparate worlds together. The marketplace was the heart of it all. Here, the immense wealth extracted from the African interior was put on display. Towering stacks of ivory tusks, cleaned and polished to a brilliant white, would be the main event, carefully weighed and graded by royal scribes. But the inventory of Axum was deep. The Pyroplus lists a staggering variety of other exports. There were the hides of hippopotami and the horns of rhinoceroses, destined for Roman armor makers and artisans. There were vast quantities of tortoiseshell, prized for its use in decorative veneers on furniture. And there was a darker side to the trade. The text mentions the export of slaves, a grim reminder that human lives were also a commodity in this ancient economy. In return for this bounty, the world brought its finest manufactured goods to Axum's door. Iron, steel, and brass, forged into spearheads, axes, and daggers, were vital imports for the Axumite military and for trade with tribes in the interior. The Axumite elite developed a taste for the Mediterranean lifestyle, importing fine wine from Italy and Laodicea and olive oil from Greece. Most tellingly, the kingdom imported gold and silver plate, not as raw material, but as finished luxury items for the royal court. And, of course, there was currency. Roman coins, auri and denarii, poured into the Axumite treasury, the universal currency of the imperial world. This entire operation was no free-for-all. It was a tightly controlled enterprise, overseen by the agents of the Axumite king. Every tusk that was sold, every bolt of cloth that was imported, was subject to taxes and tariffs. The state was the ultimate middleman, its power and wealth guaranteed by its monopoly over this flow of goods. Caravans, protected by Axumite soldiers, would begin the arduous 8-day trek from the coastal heat of Adulis, climbing nearly 8,000 feet into the cool, temperate air of the highlands. They carried the treasures of the world up to the capital, and in doing so, they carried the fuel for Axum's imperial ambitions. Adulis was the connection, the indispensable link in a chain that began in the savannas of Central Africa and ended in the palaces of Rome. It was the heart that pumped the lifeblood of commerce through the veins of the kingdom. As long as the port thrived, the kingdom would thrive with it. The river of wealth that flowed from Adulis up to the highland capital of Axum did not simply vanish into the royal treasury. It was actively invested, transformed from mere commercial profit into the tangible, awe-inspiring symbols of a great and enduring power. This was the Ivory dividend, the tangible return on the kingdom's primary export. It was a strategic allocation of capital that funded the three pillars of the Axumite state: a sophisticated, international economy, a monumental and prestige-driven culture, and a formidable military machine capable of projecting power far beyond its borders. Perhaps the most potent and direct expression of Axum's newfound status was its currency. Around the year 270 CE, under the rule of King Anjubis, Axum took a step that only the world's most confident and powerful empires, Rome, Persia, and the Kushan Empire in India, had dared to take. It began to mint its own coins in gold, silver, and bronze. This was a profound statement of sovereignty and economic ambition. An Axumite gold coin was not merely a piece of bullion, it was a piece of propaganda. On its obverse, it carried a finely detailed portrait of the reigning king, crowned and regale. On the reverse, it featured stalks of grain, a symbol of the kingdom's agricultural wealth, and, most importantly, an inscription in Greek, the international language of commerce. King of the Axumites, the coins proclaimed, ensuring their message was understood in every market from Gaul to India. The quality of these coins was exceptional, struck to a Roman weight standard to facilitate seamless international trade. The very existence of this currency revolutionized the Axumite economy. It moved transactions beyond simple barter, allowing for a more efficient and standardized system of exchange. It enabled the state to pay soldiers, fund public works, and collect taxes with unprecedented ease. But more than that, every time a Roman merchant in Alexandria or a Persian trader in the Gulf used an Axumite coin, it was an affirmation of the kingdom's power, a small but significant acknowledgement of its place in the global economic order. This entire monetary system, the ultimate symbol of economic independence, was underwritten almost entirely by the profits from the ivory trade. But Axum's ambitions were not just economic, they were monumental. The kings sought to leave a permanent mark on the landscape, a testament to their power that would awe their subjects and rivals alike. The ultimate expression of this was the creation of the great Stele Fields. In the heart of the capital and other cities, Axumite engineers undertook one of the most audacious construction projects of the ancient world. They quarried colossal blocks of granite, some weighing over 500 tons, from sites several miles away. They then carved these single, monolithic stones into representations of towering, multi-story buildings, complete with false doors and windows, and transported them, impossibly, to the royal necropolis. The Great Stele, the largest of them all, stood over 108 feet tall, a skyscraper of the ancient world. Though it fell during or shortly after its erection, its neighbor, the obelisk of Axum, soared to 79 feet and stood for over 600 years. The sheer logistical and engineering challenge of this undertaking is difficult to overstate. Scholars still debate the exact methods used to transport and erect these giants. It would have required a massive labor force, sophisticated knowledge of levers, counterweights, and earthworks, and an almost fanatical degree of social organization. This was Axum's equivalent of the pyramids, a national project that consumed immense resources, and it was the ivory dividend that made it possible. The profits from the Red Sea trade paid the wages of the thousands of laborers, engineers, and artisans. It financed the forging of the tools, the feeding of the work crews, and the bureaucracy required to manage the entire operation. These stelae were not just burial markers, they were assertions of might, permanent, physical manifestations of the wealth and power derived from the elephant tusk. This wealth also fueled military expansion. A strong army was essential, not only to defend the kingdom's borders, but also to protect the vital trade routes that were its lifeblood. The ivory dividend paid for the forging of iron weapons, the outfitting of soldiers, and the maintenance of garrisons along the caravan paths. It allowed Axum to project its power with force. Under its most powerful kings, the Axumite army crossed the Red Sea, conquering parts of southern Arabia, including the ancient kingdom of Himyar. This gave them control over the trade routes on both sides of the sea, effectively creating an Axumite lake. They pushed west into the Nile Valley, clashing with the Kingdom of Kush, and south to secure the hunting grounds and trade networks deep in the African interior. This was a military enterprise, but its goals were primarily economic, to secure, control, and dominate every facet of the luxury trade upon which its prosperity was built. The coins, the stelae, and the conquests were all part of a single, integrated strategy, each one a testament to the transformative power of white gold. To fully comprehend the scale of Axum's success, we must turn our gaze north and west, across the Red Sea and the sands of Egypt, to the heart of its single largest customer, the Roman Empire. By the time Axum was consolidating its power, Rome was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean, a sprawling, voracious empire of unprecedented wealth and consumption. For the Roman elite, the senators, generals, and aristocrats who governed this vast domain, luxury was not a mere indulgence. It was a fundamental component of power, a visual language used to articulate status, influence, and proximity to the divine. And in this vocabulary of prestige, few materials spoke more eloquently than ivory. Ivory's value in the Roman mind was derived from a potent combination of factors. It was impossibly exotic, originating from the shadowy, half-mythical lands of Ethiopia at the very edge of the known world. Its journey to the workshops of Rome was long, perilous, and fantastically expensive, automatically imbuing it with an aura of rarity, but its appeal was also tactile and aesthetic. Its cool, smooth texture, its substantial weight, and its unique, milky luminescence were unlike any other material. It was a substance that begged to be carved, holding detail with a crispness that even the finest marble could not match. In a society obsessed with spectacle and status, ivory was the ultimate raw material for conspicuous consumption. The public and political life of Rome was a theater, and ivory was a key part of the stagecraft. The most powerful symbol of a Roman magistrate's authority was the sella curalis, a ceremonial folding stool. While originally simple in design, by the height of the empire, these seats were frequently crafted entirely from, or lavishly inlaid with, ivory. When a consul or praetor took his seat upon this gleaming white chair in the forum, he was making a clear, non-verbal declaration of his power and his right to rule. It was a tradition that extended to the highest office. The emperor's throne and the scepter he held were often adorned with intricately carved ivory, linking him to the traditions of kings and even the gods themselves. This connection to power was made even more explicit through the practice of creating consular diptychs. When a wealthy aristocrat was elected to the prestigious office of consul, He would commission the creation of these objects to commemorate his accession. A diptych was a set of two hinged panels, carved from massive, flawless pieces of ivory, depicting the new consul in his robes of office, often presiding over the games he was expected to host for the public. These were not kept for personal use. They were distributed as fantastically expensive gifts to the emperor, to fellow senators, and to influential friends across the empire. They were a form of political currency, a tool for building alliances and advertising one's success. Hundreds of these have survived, a testament to how integral this specific use of ivory was to the functioning of the Roman elite. Inside the lavish villas of the Roman aristocracy, the demand was just as profound. The private sphere was another arena for the display of wealth. The lectus, or dining couch, upon which Roman nobles would recline during their famous banquets, was a prime canvas for ivory decoration. Its legs, arms, and backboards would be covered in intricately carved ivory veneers depicting scenes from Greek mythology. Entire suites of furniture, from small side tables to massive storage chests, were adorned with the material. Even the floors and walls of the most opulent homes could be inlaid with panels of ivory alongside exotic woods and precious stones. This obsession permeated every aspect of daily life for the wealthy. Roman women used finely carved ivory combs and hairpins. They stored their expensive cosmetics and perfumes in small, cylindrical ivory boxes known as pyxides. Men of letters wrote upon wax tablets with an ivory stylus. At their leisure, nobles would play board games with ivory pieces and throw ivory dice. Even their personal protection was an opportunity for display, with the hilts of daggers and swords often being crafted from solid ivory. When this overwhelming society-wide demand is multiplied across an empire of millions, the sheer volume of ivory required becomes staggering. It was a demand that the dwindling elephant herds of North Africa and the smaller tusks from India could never hope to satisfy. This is where Axum became not just a trading partner, but the indispensable foundation of a Roman cultural phenomenon. The African bush elephant tusks, funneled through Agulus, were the only source that could provide the quantity, size, and quality of ivory that the Roman market craved. Axum was the sole supplier capable of providing the massive, unblemished panels needed for a consular diptych or the thick, flawless blocks required for a life-size statue of a god. The entire Axumite state apparatus, from the hunters on the savannah to the bureaucrats in the capital, was effectively geared towards servicing this insatiable demand. The symbiotic relationship was complete. Roman culture's obsession with a symbol of status became the direct and primary source of Axum's political power, its monumental architecture, and its economic dominance. For a time, it was the perfect union of supply and demand, the engine of two empires. For nearly 300 years, the Axumite economic model had proven spectacularly successful. The kingdom had perfected its role as the indispensable supplier to the Roman world, a position that seemed unassailable. Its political, military, and cultural institutions, all financed by the ivory dividend, were at their zenith. But the foundations of this world, which seemed so permanent, were built upon two critical assumptions: that the Roman Empire would remain their primary and accessible customer, and that the Red Sea would remain an open highway for their goods. In the centuries that followed, both of these assumptions would be shattered by two of the most transformative events in human history: the Christianization of the Roman world and the explosive rise of Islam. The first great shift began not with an invasion or a revolution, but with a personal decision made by an Axumite king. In the mid-4th century CE, King Ezana ruled over an empire at the peak of its power. His early inscriptions, carved in stone, celebrate his military victories in Ge'ez, Sabaean, and Greek, boasting of his conquests in Nubia and Arabia. His early coins, like those of his predecessors, featured the disc and crescent, symbols of the traditional South Arabian gods that had long been part of the state religion. But Ezana's world was changing. In 313 CE, the Roman Emperor Constantine had issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity. A generation later, it had become the dominant faith of the Roman elite. Ezana, a shrewd and worldly ruler, understood the geopolitical implications. According to tradition, his conversion was prompted by a Syrian Christian named Frumentius, who had been shipwrecked on the Red Sea coast as a boy and brought to the Axumite court. He earned the trust of the royal family eventually becoming a tutor and advisor to the young Prince Ezana. When Ezana ascended to the throne, he not only embraced the new faith, but sent Frumentius to Alexandria to be formally consecrated as the first bishop of Axum. This was no mere personal conversion. It was a masterful act of foreign policy. By adopting Christianity, Ezana transformed Axum's relationship with its most important trading partner from a purely commercial one into a sacred alliance. Axum was now a sister kingdom to the great Christian empire of Rome. It was a strategic realignment that secured its position, elevated its prestige, and bound it closer to the Byzantine world, ensuring that Ivory, now destined for Christian icons and reliquaries as well as imperial thrones, would continue to flow north. The physical proof of this shift is undeniable. In a single reign, the symbols on Axumite coins changed. The disc and crescent vanished, replaced forever by the Christian cross. For a time, this alliance was a profound asset. Axum was seen as the guardian of Christianity in the south, a vital partner for Byzantium in its long struggle against the Sasanian Persian Empire. This holy accord reached its peak in the 6th century, when the Axumite king Caleb launched a massive seaborne invasion of southern Arabia with Byzantine encouragement to overthrow a Jewish ruler who had been persecuting the local Christian population. Axum was acting as a regional superpower, a champion of the faith, its power and influence seemingly greater than ever. But this very identity, this deep integration into the Christian world of the Mediterranean, would soon become the cause of its profound isolation. The second shift, when it came, was faster and far more disruptive. In the early 7th century, from the deserts of Arabia, a new faith and a new political order erupted onto the world stage. The rise of Islam was a historical singularity. Within a single generation, Arab armies, united by the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, shattered the old Persian Empire and stripped Byzantium of its wealthiest provinces in Syria and Egypt. Initially, the relationship between the nascent Islamic State and Axum was peaceful. In a famous episode known as the First Hijra, a group of the Prophet's earliest followers sought refuge from persecution in Mecca by fleeing to Axum, where they were given protection by the Christian king. The kingdom was still regarded as a realm of justice and stability. But as the Arab conquests morphed into a new, powerful, and expansionist caliphate, the strategic reality of the Red Sea was irrevocably altered. In 641 CE, Arab forces conquered Egypt, capturing Alexandria and severing Byzantium's direct land route to the south. Soon after, they began to build a navy. For the first time, a single unified power controlled both the Arabian and the African coasts of the Red Sea. The sea that had once been an Axumite Roman lake was now an Arab sea. The old trade routes did not die, but they were reoriented. The flow of goods was now directed towards the new centers of Islamic power in Damascus and later Baghdad. The Byzantine navy was pushed back into the Mediterranean. Direct, large-scale trade between Axum and its traditional Christian partners became increasingly difficult, dangerous, and subject to the control of a rival power. Axum was being bypassed. The kingdom that had brilliantly adapted to the first great global shift found itself tragically wrong-footed by the second. Its Christian identity, once a bridge to the most powerful empire on earth, now became a wall, isolating it from the new dynamic Islamic economic sphere that surrounded it. It was a Christian island in a rapidly expanding Islamic ocean. The cross, which had once been a symbol of a lucrative alliance, now marked Axum as an outsider in its own sea. The crescent, no longer the symbol of the old gods but now associated with a new global power, now flew from the masts of the ships that controlled the kingdom's historic trade routes. Axum's connection to the world, the very source of its wealth and power, was being systematically severed. The geopolitical earthquake of the Arab conquests did not destroy Axum overnight. An empire built over centuries does not simply evaporate, but it did trigger a slow, inexorable decline by attacking the two pillars upon which the kingdom stood: its access to international markets and the sustainability of its core resource. The crisis was both external and internal, a perfect storm of circumstances that choked the flow of wealth to a trickle and revealed the fatal fragility at the heart of Axum's single commodity economy. Externally, the situation in the Red Sea went from bad to worse. While some trade with the Islamic world continued, it was on a greatly reduced scale and on terms dictated by the new masters of the sea. The old, direct, and massively lucrative pipeline to the Byzantine Empire was now functionally severed. The demand for Axum's goods in its traditional markets had not vanished, but the ability to supply it had. Axumite merchants, once the dominant players in the region, were now minor actors in a sea controlled by others. Adding insult to injury, the port of Adulis itself, the jewel of the Axumite crown, became a target. In the early 8th century, a raid launched from the sea resulted in the port's occupation and destruction, a devastating blow to the kingdom's prestige and its remaining commercial infrastructure. Though the Axumites eventually retook and razed the city in reprisal, the message was clear. They no longer controlled their own coastline. The gateway to the world was closing. But even if the trade routes had remained wide open, Axum was beginning to face a crisis of supply. The very foundation of its wealth was proving to be finite. For over 700 years, the Axumite state had sponsored an industrial-scale hunt for elephants. From the core of the empire, the hunt had pushed ever further south and west, a relentless wave of extraction. What had once seemed like an infinite, inexhaustible resource was now showing signs of severe depletion. The elephant herds, which had once roamed the lands near the Axumite heartland, had been all but wiped out. Hunters were forced into ever longer and more dangerous expeditions, deep into the Sudanese lowlands and the African interior, driving up the cost and difficulty of acquiring each and every tusk. This relentless exploitation was part of a broader ecological crisis. The insatiable demand for ivory was mirrored by the demands of a growing population in the highlands. Centuries of intensive agriculture began to take their toll. Hillsides were deforested to provide timber for construction and fuel for a populace that needed to cook and keep warm in the cool mountain air. The loss of tree cover led to catastrophic soil erosion. The thin, fertile topsoil of the highlands, the basis of the kingdom's food security, began to wash away into the valleys. Archaeological and climate data from this period support this narrative, pointing to a prolonged dry period and evidence of environmental degradation. The fields that produced the grain depicted on Axumite coins were becoming less productive, less reliable. This created a vicious cycle. As the ivory revenues that supplemented the state treasury began to dry up, the kingdom became more reliant on its agricultural base. But that same agricultural base was weakening, stressed by both climate change and human activity. The wealth that had once allowed the kingdom to import food in times of famine was no longer available. The state's ability to fund its armies, its bureaucracy, and its public works was crippled. The ivory dividend that had built the great stelae and financed foreign wars was gone. The kings in the capital were now presiding over a kingdom whose two primary sources of sustenance, foreign trade and domestic agriculture, were simultaneously failing. This decline is starkly visible in the archaeological record. The minting of gold coins, the ultimate symbol of international prestige, ceases entirely. Silver and bronze coinage continues, but the quality becomes progressively cruder, the silver content debased, the craftsmanship a shadow of its former glory. It is the material evidence of a state running out of money. Construction of the monumental stelae had stopped centuries earlier, but now even the maintenance of large public buildings and infrastructure appears to have waned. The kingdom was contracting, its ambitions shrinking, its resources dwindling. The external shock of losing market access had exposed a mortal internal weakness. The relentless pursuit of white gold had left the kingdom with depleted forests, eroded soils, and, most critically, a scarcity of the very elephants that had once been the bedrock of its entire civilization. The last tusk had been harvested, and the bill for centuries of over-reliance was finally coming due. The collapse of the Axumite economic model forced a profound, existential re-evaluation. A civilization that had defined itself for centuries by its outward gaze, its international trade, its maritime power, its cosmopolitan ports, was now forced to turn its back on the world. The loss of the Red Sea was not just an economic blow, it was a psychological one. The coast, once the source of all wealth and opportunity, was now a hostile frontier, a source of danger, and a reminder of all that had been lost. The response was a slow, deliberate, and epoch-defining withdrawal. Axum began to pull away from the sea, retreating into the high, mountainous fortress that had always been its cultural and political core. This was not a single sudden event, but a strategic reorientation that unfolded over generations. The great coastal city of Adulis, already crippled by foreign raids, was abandoned to the shifting sands. The once bustling metropolis of Axum itself, located in the northern Tigray region, gradually lost its preeminence. Its location, so ideal for managing the old trade routes to the coast, was now dangerously exposed. The center of political and religious gravity began to shift south and west, deeper into the impregnable highlands of the interior, to regions that were more agriculturally self-sufficient and far more defensible. The empire was looking inward, consolidating its resources, and fundamentally redefining its own identity. Archaeological evidence powerfully corroborates this narrative of retreat. Excavations at the site of the original capital show a decline in new construction and a gradual depopulation. Conversely, further south in regions like Luster, new centers of power begin to emerge, marked by the construction of rock-hewn churches and other significant structures. It was a physical migration of the state itself, a conscious decision to abandon the frontiers of a lost maritime empire in favor of securing a smaller, more isolated, but more sustainable terrestrial kingdom. With this physical withdrawal came a profound cultural shift. The international character of the Axumite elite began to fade. The use of Greek, the language of international commerce that had graced Axumite coins and royal inscriptions for centuries, disappeared completely. In its place, the indigenous Jaez language, the liturgical and literary language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, became the sole instrument of the state and its culture. The kingdom's Christian identity, once a tool of international diplomacy, now became the central, unifying principle of this new, inward-looking state. Cut off from the wider Christian world of Byzantium and the Coptic Church in Egypt, the Ethiopian Church developed its own unique traditions, its own saints, and its own rich literary canon. This was the period in which the foundational legends of the Ethiopian nation, such as the Kebra Nagast, which details the story of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon and the bringing of the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia, were consolidated. The state was building a new nationalistic identity, one rooted not in global trade, but in a divine mandate and a sacred lineage. This period is often referred to by historians as a dark age for Axum, but that is a deeply misleading term. It was not an age of collapse into barbarism. It was an age of transformation. The kingdom did not vanish. Rather, it morphed from a trade-based, maritime power into a feudal, agricultural, and intensely devout highland kingdom. The wealth was no longer in ivory tusks and Roman gold, but in land and livestock. The power was no longer projected by fleets in the Red Sea, but by castles on mountain tops and by the spiritual authority of the church. This was the birth of medieval Ethiopia. The very isolation that had been an economic death sentence became the crucible of a unique and resilient civilization that would, against all odds, maintain its independence for another 1,000 years, becoming the only region of Africa to successfully resist the scramble for Africa in the 19th century. The ghost of Axum's former glory never completely vanished. It lived on in the monumental stelae that dotted the old capital and in the kingdom's enduring Christian faith. But the engine that had driven its spectacular rise had been shut down forever. The single commodity kingdom, utterly dependent on the tusk of the elephant and the appetite of a foreign empire, had been a magnificent but flawed creation. When its connection to the world was severed and its core resource depleted, it did not die, but it was forced to become something entirely new. It retreated from the world stage, leaving behind the silent, enigmatic monuments of a lost golden age, a testament to the immense power and the immense risk of building a kingdom on a single commodity. The story of the Kingdom of Axum is one of spectacular success and profound, cautionary failure. Our investigation has demonstrated that this great power, which for centuries stood as an equal to Rome and Persia, built its entire imperial structure upon the foundation of a single commodity, the ivory of the African elephant. This was not an accidental or incidental trade. It was the central pillar of the Axumite state, a consciously developed and ruthlessly efficient industry that transformed the kingdom from a regional power into a global economic force. The profits from this white gold were the lifeblood of the empire, the dividend that paid for its armies, its monumental architecture, and its sophisticated gold currency. Axum's mastery of the ivory trade was the primary cause of its golden age. Conversely, we have found that the kingdom's subsequent decline was not the result of a single, decisive military defeat or internal rebellion. Instead, Axum fell victim to the inherent fragility of its own economic model. Its downfall was the direct consequence of its over-reliance on this one resource. We have traced the two interconnected causes of this collapse. The first was external and geopolitical. The explosive rise of Islam in the 7th century fundamentally realigned the powers of the ancient world. It shattered Axum's vital and long-standing trade relationship with the Christian Byzantine Empire, effectively severing its connection to its primary market. The Red Sea, once an Axumite highway, became a barrier controlled by a new and dominant rival, choking off the kingdom's main source of revenue. The second cause was internal and ecological. Centuries of relentless, industrial-scale hunting had pushed the elephant populations of the region to the brink of collapse. The supply of the very resource that fueled their economy was becoming exhausted. This crisis of resource depletion was compounded by broader environmental degradation, including deforestation and soil erosion, which weakened the kingdom's agricultural base at the precise moment it could no longer afford to import food. Stripped of its primary export and facing a crisis at home, the Axumite state lost the economic foundation upon which its power rested. The decision to retreat from the coast and turn inward was not a choice, but a necessity dictated by these new, harsh realities. The fall of Axum, therefore, was not a sudden event, but the slow, inevitable unwinding of a single commodity economy finally confronted with the consequences of its own design, a stark and timeless lesson on the dangers of building an empire on a finite and vulnerable foundation. The towering stelae of Axum stand today not as tombstones of a dead civilization, but as monuments to a powerful and enduring lesson. The story of this great African kingdom is far more than a fascinating chapter of ancient history. It is a recurring narrative, a pattern that has repeated itself throughout human civilization and continues to unfold in our own time. Axum's spectacular rise, its profound wealth, and its eventual, lingering decline serve as a powerful historical case study for the perilous allure of a single commodity economy. It is a story that speaks directly to the modern world, echoing in the oil fields of the Middle East, the cobalt mines of the Congo, and the vast soy plantations of South America. The central lesson of Axum is one of vulnerability. The kingdom brilliantly leveraged its unique geographical and natural resources to achieve immense power. By becoming the master supplier of a luxury good craved by a global superpower, it secured a position of incredible influence and prosperity. It did what many nations still aspire to do today. It found its niche and exploited it to the fullest. For a time, the strategy was an unmitigated success. But by anchoring its entire destiny to the elephant tusk, Axum made itself profoundly susceptible to external shocks it could not control. When the geopolitical landscape shifted with the rise of a new power, its trade routes were severed. When its primary customer, the Roman Empire, was itself transformed, demand faltered. And when the finite natural resource itself began to dwindle, the entire economic edifice began to crumble. Axum's fate was ultimately decided not in its capital, but in the forums of a distant empire and on the savannas where its resource was slowly vanishing. This is the timeless paradox of resource wealth. It can provide a shortcut to prosperity, funding development and projecting power on a scale that would otherwise be impossible. Yet it often breeds a dangerous dependency, discouraging the diversification that is the hallmark of a resilient and adaptable economy. Axum's story compels us to ask critical questions of our own economic systems. How many modern nations are similarly reliant on the price of a single commodity set in a foreign market? How many are depleting their natural capital, be it oil, timber, or precious minerals, without a clear plan for what comes next? The ghost of Axum reminds us that market access is never guaranteed, that global demand is fickle, and that natural resources are rarely as inexhaustible as they seem. The legacy of Axum, however, is not only one of failure. It is also a story of resilience and transformation. When its global model collapsed, the kingdom did not completely disintegrate. It turned inward, drawing upon its deep cultural and religious roots to forge a new identity. It became the foundation of modern Ethiopia, a nation that would carry the torch of its unique Christian heritage through centuries of isolation, a testament to the enduring power of cultural identity when economic models fail. Yet, the memory of that golden, global age was never lost. It was a warning, a reminder that the fortunes of nations can rise and fall on the whims of trade and the availability of a single precious resource. It is a warning that remains as relevant today as it was more than 1,000 years ago, etched in the silent, soaring stones of a forgotten African superpower.